All right, now we are ready to look at the J exercises. First, stop this video and carefully read J first, because this is not the kind of thing where it would be any good for me to lecture you on what all the different fallacies are. The reading covers that very well. So the strategy here is to simply learn by looking at the examples and talking about them. It is also important that you have out page 11, where I define in basic terms each of the fallacies, so you can keep pausing the video and try to answer each example while you're looking at your homework to see how you're doing. I will, and this will be both great and just silly, I will be mimicking class discussion by having, wait till you see them, some participants giving right and wrong answers so we can talk about different fallacies that you might be confused about. Also, after we give the answers for each part one of each of the examples, I will then show you what the good answers are and also how I will grade that. Because as we learned in video number 1, I am looking for the primary technique that's working the most in the example, and then also for, if they're there, secondary techniques. And so I'll show you how I will give the bulk of the credit to the primary technique, and the last bit of credit to get full credit will come from finding the most important secondary techniques. So I'll be listing those at the bottom as you see me keep doing. Good? All right, we're ready to start. Example A. Everyone should support the death penalty. Either you kill the murderers or tell them to go and kill some more. This one's fairly straightforward. Yes. Eileen. Yes, that's right. This is the black and white fallacy. So a black and white fallacy is taking an issue that's complicated, has several options, and acting as if there's only two options. You can either kill them or let them go. George, please. That's a good attempt. Let me explain why it's not a euphemism. A euphemism is when you use a word in a way that's misleading to your audience. So if you use a word and it makes the thing sound better than it is, or its opposite is a dysphemism, that's when you use a word to make the audience think it's worse than it is. Let's do a little tangent on euphemisms. So euphemisms, think of what are your favorite euphemisms for prostitute? Great. Yes, exactly. Oh, sorry, George. Another guess? Equivocation. No, equivocation is when you take a word and during your argument you change its meaning, like you rely on a word meaning that can be a little slippery. So for example, if I tell someone that I'm a socialist and they have a completely different definition than me, they might base their argument on that slippery definition. So they will say, oh, you like socialism, so you want everyone's ideas and freedoms completely controlled by the government. No, that is a different meaning than what I would use, so you're equivocating on the word socialism. Any other guesses? Yes, good, right? I do think the secondary technique here is strawman. Now, think of the metaphor of strawman to make that one clear. Think of a prize fight. If you are wanting to be an MMA fighter or a boxer and you want to prove that you are a good fighter, what do? You have to defeat the best contender or the strongest contenders to the title. You don't go out there and beat up a bunch of 4-year-olds because this doesn't make you look good. Well, a strawman argument is when, instead of attacking your opponent's real position, you turn their position into a joke version of it so that it's easier to attack. So notice, in this case, do you really think that people who oppose the death penalty really think that we should just let murderers go so that they can kill some more? That's not their actual position. That is just attacking a straw man version of their actual position. George? Yes. I would say that there is a little bit of fear here, right? So that would be a really good guess that would help your answer a little. So To summarize A, if you put black and white fallacy, that would get you the bulk of the credit. And then if you also put strawman fallacy, that would get you the remainder of the credit. That would be a great answer. If you also put fear, that helps your answer a little bit as well. All right, so let's look at number B. In B, it says, what? Now I can't smoke in restaurants? This is going too far. Pretty soon, smokers are going to be liable for damaging the health of their own kids with secondhand smoke in the privacy of their own homes. Let's try. Okay, George. Yes, good, George. There is some fear at play here, making you afraid of the takeover of the government or the loss of our rights. So there is some, it looks to be exaggerated fear. Good. Yep, that's right, that's right. In this case, you could say it's not obvious, but there is some, and by the way, George, we pronounce it hyperbole. I know it's spelled hyperbole, but it's a weird word pronounced hyperbole, and that just means something that's an exaggeration to the point of being incredibly unbelievable, right? So not just a mild exaggeration. Hyperbole is when it's an impossible exaggeration. Eileen? Yes, the primary technique here is slippery slope. A slippery slope is when you start with one event and you fear this chain of causes that's going to happen. So you take the first step, and this is going to lead to all of these disastrous consequences down the road. So to review B. For B, slippery slope would get you the bulk of the credit. That's the primary technique. Fear is the secondary technique, and I would also give a little credit if someone put hyperbole, but again, I wouldn't be looking for that example. That one's pretty subtle. All right, let's look at example C. One of my favorites. I won't try that workout supplement. 2 guys took that and their junk shriveled. Let's see. George? Yes, okay. I could see why someone would think this is false cause. And the false cause isn't really there, but I could see that our brains would go there. Because what we're thinking is, what could be the other possible causes of, forgive me for saying this, shrunken junk. That's a good rhyme. And so it's not really stated, right, what the cause is. There's really a different technique that's primary. George? Yes, George. This would make sense as an example of fear. Again, that's not the primary technique, but those are smart examples, right? Those do seem to be playing a role. George? Okay. This is not an appeal to ignorance. Appeal to ignorance is the most common guess that I see when I give these quizzes or these examples. Now, let me clarify what an appeal to ignorance is. If you have an author of an argument that is a big dummy, you do not call it an appeal to ignorance, right? Their stupidity has likely led to them to make other problems. An appeal to ignorance is when the author, the arguer, uses something unknown as if that should count as evidence for their conclusion. So if they say, I have never seen China, so it must not exist, they're saying, because I haven't seen it, that's my reason to disbelieve it. Let's try one that George would want to give. Go ahead, George. Yes, we haven't seen Jeff's brain, therefore he probably doesn't have one. Again, the lack of evidence there is given as evidence. Something we're ignorant of is supposed to give us a reason to believe something. Great example. Eileen? Yep, that's it. This is a hasty generalization. Now, let's do a little tangent here. As you know by now, and especially if you watched the first video, the main problem with fallacies, when we think of what makes an argument strong, so review what the idea of I was. In the I reading, we found that a strong argument will have relevant premises, truthful premises, and also have enough premises, enough evidence in those premises. Well, most fallacies will fail because of relevance. A hasty generalization fails for another reason. What is it? insufficient evidence, right? There might be some relevant evidence, but we need a lot more. That's why we accuse it of being a hasty generalization. So in this case, right, we look at this and say, only 2 examples? There could be many other reasons for the, forgive me, shrunken junk. That doesn't seem like enough evidence, especially if thousands of people use that workout supplement and their junk, is just fine. Next, example D. The death penalty is morally fine because murderers deserve to be killed. This is a really tricky example, right? So if you've tried this and racked your brain for a while, this is one of the tougher ones. What is it, Eileen? Yes, right. That is impressive. This is begging the question, or another name for it is circular reasoning. If you look at this, right, each of the premise and the conclusion are really based on the same basic opinion. So instead of giving new reasons to believe those opinions, they just kind of use them in a circle. So we can think of it this way. The death penalty is morally fine. Well, why is it morally fine? Because murderers deserve to be killed. Okay, but why do murderers deserve to be killed? Well, because the death penalty is morally fine. Again, that one is tricky, right? But it's begging the question or arguing in a circle. You could say, for example, that D has suppressed evidence or a proof surrogate. Those often sound similar to begs the question, so that would be a very forgivable mistake, but begs the question, circular reasoning, those are the same thing, would get full credit with just the one fallacy. Example E. The animal rights people shouldn't pick on rodeos. If they've come out and see the way the clowns put smiles on the kids' faces and the determination it takes to ride the broncos or rope the hogs, they change their minds. George? Okay. I can see why you would think that this is a hasty generalization, but let me show you why it's subtly not that technique. In a hasty generalization, you have some evidence that might be relevant, but you'll need a lot more for the conclusion. It's a big general conclusion, and you only have a tiny bit of evidence. Well, in this case, it's not the issue where having more of this kind of evidence would help. It's a different problem. Eileen. Yes, so this case is a red herring. The author has quite literally changed the subject. Let me give a terrible analogy, right? So let me use an analogy for this and see if you can detect the same technique being used. Let's say I'm making an argument for why child abuse isn't so bad. And then I say this, here's why child abuse isn't so bad. If you saw the strength and techniques I use when I beat my kids and the smiles it puts on my wife and I's faces, then you would see that people shouldn't pick on my child abuse. Please forgive that crazy example, but do you hear it? That is the kind of evidence given for animal rights. It actually had very little to do with animal rights. Instead, they changed the subject and talked about how great the cowboys are, right? And how happy it makes the kids when they see these rodeos.